Hello and welcome to our last lecture in this series on the Exalted Treatise on the Response of the Tao. Through the many weeks, we've been looking at the third section of the Exalted Treatise, which is a very long section on the misdeeds, thoughts, words, and actions, etc. And today we will explore the final section, this conclusion. So I'll start by reading out this first passage. So it states that for such misdeeds, the above misdeeds that we've been exploring, the spirits of destiny reduce one's lifespan by units of 12 years or 100 days, according to the gravity of each event. And when one's lifespan is completely depleted, one dies. So the misdeeds we've been looking at are numerous. And the main thing about these misdeeds is that there's often a depth to them, in the sense that it's not often the literal meaning. So you would have realized that when we explore these ideas, often, 1 week we may simply talk about 1 or 2 lines, because there is quite a depth. A way to think about it, to conceptualize it, is to categorize these various misdeeds. And these are just some of the categories that Venerable Master Jin Kong has listed out. So they're not all the categories, but just some. So you would have noticed that there are misdeeds in relation to those who abuse their power and authority. So in relation to leaders, not just government officials or magistrates, judges, but anyone who has some authority. There were misdeeds in relation to harming life. Now, it's not just human life, but it's also the lives of animals, creatures great and small, plants, trees, and even grasses. There were a number of misdeeds about being extravagant and wasting things. Then underhanded conduct. So underhanded meaning that you're doing it in a very secretive way. It's not overt. People may not notice it. And the classic example is, you seem very kind, compassionate, but actually inside you're harboring these cruel intentions. You've got a malicious intent. Then there were a number of misdeeds in relation to our family. So our parents, our siblings, our aunties and uncles, as well as even parents-in-law. And finally, the section that Kelly covered a lot last week was in relation to the Taoist the spirits and the deities in the Taoist tradition. So, for example, the kitchen god. And we ended last week with the misdeed of killing snakes and turtles. And why out of all of the other animals are snakes and turtles are singled out, and the very last of the misdeeds is because they have, in the animal kingdom, they are identified as being animals who have some of the longest lives. Some live to over 100 years, or even longer than humans. And so by taking their life, really they have the most to lose. So that's why they are particularly singled out, and in particular, turtles are considered sacred. So there's just, some way of trying to find, grouping these misdeeds so that you can think about them in a more convenient way. And all of these misdeeds, there are various, is to try to help you identify and detect things that you might be doing in your life, but importantly, things that you might be thinking. So the reason why we've gone into so much detail is because it's not just the literal meaning, isn't it? When you delve deeper, you may realize that you might be prone to committing these misdeeds, even though you may not have acted on them. So I'll give you just a random example, something that we've talked about before, this idea of harassing and bullying subordinates. That seems quite exaggerated. And some people might say, well, I'll never do that because I'm not a manager, I'm not an executive of my organization. I don't have staff that I can control or even harass. But think about, what if you have a position of authority, or you're able to guide junior staff, junior colleagues, or even junior students, and they may look up to you. And you have the ability to explain to them, to help them understand what they need to do. In that position, you could also be prone to taking advantage of your authority, your seniority, and possibly harass and bully others without even realizing. And, the point is to take a step back and really delve into these and think about, well, why would I be doing this? So one example would be because of jealousy, right? You see someone who is younger, a junior colleague who actually is very competent, and you feel threatened that, if they are, recognized for their talent, for their knowledge, that they may be promoted above you, and as a result, your position is threatened, and so as a result, you find all the difficult tasks for them to do, and in other words, bury their talent, so they are swamped and perhaps even humiliated, and they will never get their chance to show how their true potential. So jealousy might be one of the reasons. It could be because you're the kind of person who likes to see people stressed. You don't like to see your subordinates being relaxed and happy. You want them to be anxious and stressed, and doing a lot of work that's overwhelming them. And if you have that kind of attitude, then it's important to realize that actually that's quite unhealthy. That it's not healthy to enjoy the suffering of others. Or it could be that as a senior in the organization, you are stingy. You don't provide the basic sort of working conditions or even wages so that people, your subordinates, can actually complete their tasks. And yet you're, as it says here, severe in its acting. You're really demanding in what you want them to achieve, and to certain standards and levels, even though you haven't provided the resources. So you can see that just out of random, we can think of 3 different sort of attitudes that underlie this particular misdeed. And it's important to not just read it and take the literal meaning and say, okay, well, I don't do this. I don't harass or bully anyone, but think back and say, well, do I have any of those underlying thoughts that I may be prone to if I'm in that leadership position, or if I have the ability to mentor those who are younger than me? So that's the whole point of this exploration, is to try to help us reflect on each of these lines, because it's about recognizing our thoughts. And each of these lines point to several thoughts. It's about recognizing it in ourselves. Okay, so it's not about judging others. It's about recognizing it in ourselves and thinking about how to nip it in the bud. So once we've recognized it, we know, okay, well, this is stated in the Exalted Treatise. It's a misdeed. It will lead to demerits and ultimately misfortune. So the Exalted Treatise, this study, helps us to really recognize, to evaluate. And that is so important in our daily lives, because many of us may go about our studies, our work, our leisure, without ever really reflecting on whether I should be having these emotions, whether I should be responding in these ways, until, of course, we run into difficulty. If we have some sort of disagreement or conflict with someone, and it creates sort of emotional tension, or if we encounter setbacks in our work or our studies and we wonder why, or we may encounter some sort of illness, and then we may be questioning, why me? And oftentimes when you encounter these problems, it's too late. So the Exalted Treatise is about prevention. It's about recognizing these thoughts and nipping them in the bud, preventing you from, actually going about and committing these various misdeeds, whether it's thoughts, words, or actions. But it's the underlying thoughts that we really should be addressing before it gets too far. And so in this concluding section, the Exalted Treatise highlights why all of these misdeeds are so important for us to learn. Why bother listing them one by one and reflecting on them? Well, as it says here, there are consequences. There are consequences for our lifespan. And this is a very fair system. It's based, the lifespan that's reduced is entirely based on the seriousness of our offense. So you might be thinking, okay, well, perhaps this misdeed is not as serious as other misdeeds. Well, that's not what it means here. The seriousness of the offence is based on the impact that your misdeed has. So if we go back to that example, bullying and harassing subordinates, perhaps you have a subordinate who is quite resilient. They have a very good attitude to life. They can take the stress. And they, despite your harassment, they are able to go about their work and their family life and health is not affected. Then maybe because you have committed that misdeed, your life might be reduced by 100 days. Okay, let's say, for example. But in the case that you have another staff member who is more fragile, and they can't take the stress, they may develop depression. And to the extent that they cannot take it anymore, and they might take their life. And in that case, the gravity of the offence would be much more, it might be more serious, wouldn't it? And therefore your lifespan might be reduced by 12 years. So you can see that it's not based on your misdeed, harassing subordinates, but it's the impact of that. And imagine if you were the executive of a multinational company and you had these, very stringent policies that, would affect thousands of staff members around the world. Well, then the gravity of the offence would be multiplied, wouldn't it? So it's not just, in relation to individuals. It could be in relation to the numbers of people that are affected. But also on top of that, the time element is important. There's the short-term impact, but then there's also the long-term impact. What do I mean by that? So the long-term impact is when you have set a precedent. And therefore, when, if it's been publicized, people will say, well, this person's done that, it seems okay. And the person may not be even related to your company or have met you, but you would have influenced them in a negative way. So there's that more long-term impact. And as I mentioned before, that the impact of that misdeed, the harassment, for example, the bullying, may not be seen immediately. The person may crumble under pressure, but in over years or months, for example. So that there's that short-term impact, long-term, and then, based on the sort of impact it has on the number of people and what happens to their lives. So you can see that one misdeed it could have taken just a few minutes to bully someone or harass someone. But actually, that few minutes, that's not the gravity of the offence. The gravity of the offence is the impact that it has. And that is what is, is a wake-up call for us, because we think that maybe it's just one misdeed or a few minutes. But actually, we have to be reminded that the true impact. So there's consequences, and that's why we need to learn this. These so-called, how it works, the Exalted Treatise explains that it's through the spirits. Now, this is a flashback to an earlier section. The first section of the Exalted Treatise tells us that there are spirits. There are spirits in our realm, this human realm on earth, but also in the celestial realms in heaven. And they report and they know everything, our thoughts, our words, our actions, and they are able to report on that. So it's not just our misdeeds, but they will also report on our good deeds. And these spirits, it's important to understand that there's a very good analogy that they are almost like the police force or the judiciary in the human realm. So everyone knows that there's a police force out there, law enforcement agencies, but we may never come into contact with the police if we don't commit crime. So we won't be arrested by the police or ever have to front up to court if we're law-abiding citizens. And that's the same with these spirits, that they keep check on us. But the punishment or the reward that we receive is entirely based on our own actions, our own thoughts. And so, just reading this word spirits, we shouldn't immediately think that there's some sort of superstitious belief here, that, we need to make offerings to the spirits and try to bribe them to give us good reports. Obviously, that's not going to happen. That's not possible. The spirits, this sort of bureaucracy of spirit officials, they are completely objective, just like the police force and the judiciary in the human realm. So if that helps you understand it better, you can think of it that way, that this is an objective kind of system. It's a fair system, and it's based on what we do, what we've done, and then our lifespan is reduced. And we may not feel that, particularly if we still have existing lifespan, right? But you will feel it, because it's not just the consequence of a reduction of lifespan, but also poverty, suffering, misfortune that you can see here, various types of misfortune, poverty, distress, stress, being despised, encountering disaster, etc. So it's not just that your lifespan is reduced. That may be symptomless, if you still have lifespan, but you will feel and encounter other types of misfortune. Just it's really just too many to list, but there's just some general categories here. The point, of course, then is, how to avoid this misfortune. It's important. We can think of all the different types of misfortune, but how do we avoid it? And that's what the Exalted Treatise is about. Now, the other point I want to make before I leave the slide is that our lifespan, you might say, well, say, for example, the life expectancy of an adult in the UK is, most people live to the age of 80, right? That's the average life expectancy. But that doesn't mean that everyone will. That's just an average. And even if you live to 80, does it mean that you'll be in perfect health? That's another question mark. But the point is that not everyone comes to this world with 80 years of life, or even 100 years of life. And, through our demerits, they become gradually shortened. In fact, we don't know how many years we have left. That's the truth. And therefore, we can't simply look at, 100 days. Each time that's nothing, that's 3 months. We have to realize that what it's saying here is not the figure, but the consequence, that all our misdeeds, even these thoughts, have consequences. And there's a system in place by which the punishment is meted out, or the reward. And therefore, we need to be very careful about what it is that we do on a moment-to-moment basis, and use the Exalted Treatise as a way to evaluate. So the different types of consequences, we've read this before, but the conclusion takes it further, tells us that, even after we pass away, there are still consequences. So it says here, if there are unpunished offences at death, misfortunes will befall one's descendants. Now, people have asked, well, why is it that these descendants, they seem quite innocent? They haven't committed any misdeeds. Why is it that they encounter misfortune and suffering? Well, there's two explanations. The first is that based on the Taoist understanding that, we don't simply just have this lifetime, but actually we've come to this lifetime with, misfortune and good fortune based on what we've done in the past life. And so our descendants, yes, they might have just been born, but in their past life, they would have committed similar misdeeds. And therefore, as soon as they're born, they will experience the consequences of their misdeeds. And so the family that you are born in is not at random. There's no accidents. The family that you are born in is based on your prior misdeeds or good deeds. And therefore, based on that, your family will be a very fortunate family, very rich or prosperous family, etc., or one that's suffered is quite poor and destitute, and is encountering very many difficulties. So you can see that this is also a very fair system. The descendants, the other reason is, of course, that if we do commit misdeeds and we, for example, ill-gotten gains, then it's our family that benefits first from this wealth, and therefore they also have a price to pay for that. So the idea then is that what you do actually affects your loved ones as well, your family, and even future generations. And it's not just your own misfortune and suffering. So that's the new idea here. And then the Exalted Treatise then goes on to discuss some very common misdeeds. So here, forcefully cheating someone of their property. I think, when we went through the third section, you would have realized that there was a lot in relation to greed, to this forcefully cheating using unscrupulous tactics, to overtly or underhandedly to cheat someone. Could be using some sort of pressure, violence, threats, etc., or just scamming them without them even realizing, but to take their property. And so it's ill-gotten gains. Not only will you experience misfortune yourself, but it will also affect your family, your immediate family, your partner, your children, but also other family members, extended family, and also, as we read earlier, descendants. And this occurs not just in the short term, but affects them for their whole lives, just as it affects us if we committed the misdeed. So if they have lifespan left, as we explained before, their lifespan will be reduced, but at the same time they will encounter this misfortune. Here, floods and fire refer to all types of natural disaster. So it could be stormwater damage. It could be a tree falling on your house. So natural disaster. Then theft, robbery would be, disaster or loss related to man-made. Being scammed, for example. Suffering loss of property. For example, the price of the shares that you have drops. And so, all of these types of misfortune would relate to your material possessions, right? Your house, your property, your wealth. But then it also talks about illness. So illness is something that affects you personally. So if you're a millionaire, maybe, if you crash your car, you just simply write it off and buy a new car. What's, several tens of thousands? It's really a drop in the ocean, isn't it? But if it affects your body, you really can't escape from the pain and suffering. And, no amount of money can really buy you health. Sometimes, there are many diseases that have no medical treatment. So this illness is something that will rack up medical expenses, but also cause you, this physical suffering. Then there are disputes. So it could be marital disputes leading to obviously very expensive legal fees and those sorts of expenses, but also damage to your reputation and, more importantly, the rupture of that relationships. So, there's no order here. It's to say that, you will experience these various types of misfortune, and they're different categories, as you can see, but they're sort of representative of the full extent of different types of misfortune. And the Exalted Treatise is quite clear that it is a very fair system, because you experience this loss of property, damage to property, loss of wealth through medical expenses or legal expenses, to the value of the original misappropriation. What does that mean? It means that how much you lose or waste on this misfortune actually amounts to how much you've cheated someone else of their property. So it's a fair system. You've caused someone else pain and suffering and loss of property, so you yourself will experience this pain and suffering and loss of property to the same value as the original. So it's very clear and explicit here how the whole system works. Another example of a type of misdeed that's very common is to cause someone to die unjustly. So, as you can imagine, there's a cause. The effect is that you yourself will pass away through an untimely, unnatural death because you've caused someone to do the same. Now, when we look at the collected commentaries, there are several examples that will help you understand what it means to cause someone to die unjustly. First, as part of the judiciary, sort of carelessly sentencing criminals such that they may be, the sentence is probably more excessive than their crime. In the military, causing innocent lives to be lost. As a health professional, so it's not just a doctor, but it could be nurses, anyone in the health professions, pharmacists, for example, not providing the correct treatment. And as a result, the patient not only doesn't recover, but actually gets worse, right? Because they already have this illness. So by not, being mindful and careful in prescription of treatment, you could cause someone an untimely, unjust death, and therefore that will happen to you. Infanticide is something that we've talked about in previous lectures. This idea of voodoo is then about sorcery, using various unscrupulous tactics to cause someone suffering and ultimately death. And the last one is something that sort of it might be quite surprising to many of you. The idea that teachers and educators are also part of this can also cause someone to die unjustly. How does that work? Well, teachers, now we're not just talking about primary school, secondary school, and university level teachers, but also, as it says, educators, so anyone involved in educating others, because you have the privileged position of being able to shape the minds of your students, of people who are listening to you, because you happen to be an expert in this area, then what we say, what we say as teachers would, but not only what you say, but what you do, your example, is quite powerful. And, you have, as an educator, you have the ability to really shape the minds and influence the students to know what is right and wrong. And if we set the wrong example, we provide incorrect instruction, or we simply neglect telling students what is wrong, then what happens is that the students will never know that they're doing something wrong. And as a result, their lifespan will be reduced as they commit these misdeeds, and they will ultimately die an untimely, unjust death. So, and you might say, well, I'm not really a specialist in something like the Exalted Treatise and these kinds of texts. My knowledge area is completely different. Actually, every educator, you're an expert in this particular field, this specialty, and the knowledge that you impart can be used for the good or for harm. And it's important to impart that knowledge in a way, but also imparting the correct attitude that, we try to use the knowledge to benefit the lives of others. Even something like science, that, you might be able to inspire your students on the great advances of science, but at the same time, also instill them with the attitude of using science and scientific advances, theories, with responsibility, to be responsible with that knowledge. And then, you may be a primary school teacher or a secondary school teacher, and because of your inspiration, these students go on to then become specialists in field of science. Then they bring that attitude to their work in the future. So all educators have this responsibility to help students, to shape students in their thinking about how to use whatever knowledge it is to the best of their ability for the betterment of society and humanity. And that's why teachers and educators are also included in this particular misdeed. So that's something to take note of. Okay, so the two main sort of misdeeds that the conclusion draws out is that idea of greed, and then also the idea of causing harm to life. Okay, so very important misdeeds and thoughts that we have to be mindful of. And then it sort of goes on to use an analogy to help us it's a very vivid analogy, but it helps us to understand how to think about these misdeeds. It states, those taking ill-gotten gains may be likened to satisfying one's hunger with tainted meat, or to quenching one's thirst with poisoned wine. Not only is there no temporary satisfaction, but death also becomes imminent. So very sort of very concrete, kind of vivid analogy. Meat, why meat and wine? Well, because in the 12th century, when the Exalted Treatise was being was compiled, meat and wine was not something that you would have every day. It was something that people would look forward to, perhaps. But the point is that even though it's something that could be considered a luxury, would you still eat it if it was poison? Okay, so that's the point here. No one in their right mind would eat or drink poison. Let's not talk about poison. Let's imagine you're eating your meal, and then all of a sudden, someone tells you that there's something toxic in there. You would stop eating, let alone, someone told you that it was poison. You'd definitely stop eating. And that's the thing. If we knew that these misdeeds were so that they would cause our suffering and even death, reduces our lifespan, but also causes poverty, resentment, causes, stress and anxiety, illness, etc., then we wouldn't be even thinking about these ill-gotten gains or cheating others, taking advantage of others, trying to control others for our own purposes and our own benefit. You would, as soon as that thought crossed your mind, you would think, it's poison and you don't want to have anything to do with it. And so that's why this analogy is used, because it's very, you have to realize to let it go. There's also a very good analogy in the Analects. And Confucius talks about, the good and the bad here. So it begins with the good. So if you see anything good, so someone doing a good deed, or, reading the sage texts and these great instructions, then to pursue it as if you're unable to reach it. So never stop, and always give your utmost to trying to achieve this goodness. But if you see something unkind, if you see something negative, and so that whole section on misdeeds, if we ever come across any of those things, or we ever think any of these things, then we should try to reject it as if a hand has been put into hot water. Most people, they feel that it's hot water, it immediately reflects it, it's a reflex just to take your hand out. And the analogy that we saw before is equally compelling, in the sense that, as soon as any of these thoughts cross your mind, that, you want to, going back to that example, bully someone to get your way, then you should just let go of that thought immediately, because it's like poison. Not only does it harm you, you'll have suffering in the future, but ultimately it causes loss of your lifespan, loss of life. So that's how serious these misdeeds are. It seems like it's just one line after one line, but when you delve deep, you realize that actually these thoughts are very powerful, not just the effect on others, but actually on yourself and your family. So you don't want to have, you don't want to have a bar of it. Just let it go. Don't let these thoughts cross your mind. The thing that strikes me in the conclusion, of course, what we've read up to now, is that it sort of lays out all the different consequences. Consequences for your health, for your wealth, and not just for you, but your family, for your future generations of your family, and this idea that causes loss of life, not just for yourself but for everyone around you. So it's toxic, these misdeeds. So how to create good fortune? Now the Exalted Treatise then changes in tone. Before it was quite, in a way quite stern, but here it says, well, you can do good. You start just with one thought of kindness. It doesn't take very much. You can do it. Just give rise to a thought of kindness, and immediately you'll be accompanied by these spirits of good fortune who will try to, who are, more than happy to record and report that you have done this good deed. right? And this is just at the level of the thoughts. It isn't, you haven't even put it into action yet. It's a thought of kindness. And who can't do that? Everyone can do this. On the other hand, if you give rise to a thought of wrongdoing, right? So any one of the things in the third section, then you'd be followed by spirits of misfortune. And that's even before you've actually put it into practice. You've actually actioned it. So there's really two. You have to make that decision, isn't it? Do I give rise to thoughts of kindness or thoughts of wrongdoing? And there's a very good story in the collected commentaries. It's about a man by the name of Yuan, and he has this disagreement, this conflict with another person named Miao, okay, Mr. Miao. And it's not clear in the commentary what exactly happened between them. But Mr. Yuan, so Yuan is so incensed, so angry, that he makes up his mind to take revenge and sets off 4 o'clock in the morning in the direction of Miao's house. Okay, he wants to seek revenge. And so as he's making his way to Miao's house, he passes by a monastery, and 4 o'clock in the morning, the abbot is already up, conducting the morning recitations, and he sees this man walk past. But he also sees that behind him are a number of spirits, these unkind spirits, spirits of misfortune. They're carrying weapons, they're carrying knives, spears, etc. And there's a whole train of them behind this person. Then, a while passes, and this man walks back from comes back in the opposite direction. But this time, there's a parade of kind spirits, spirits of good fortune. They're carrying, jade, gold, banners. It's like a, huge parade, celebration kind of thing behind him. And the abbot is quite curious. So he, invites this man in and asks him, what happened? Why did you set out so early in return? Now, in those days, of course, these abbots, these monastics were very well respected. And this Mr. Yuan, he then, honestly tells him what happened. He says, well, actually in the morning, I was quite angry and actually wanted to murder this Mr. Miao. And so I made up my mind, and that's what I wanted to do. But as I got close to his house, I remembered that he had a wife and young children, and he also had an elderly mother. And if anything happened to him, all of his family, including his mother, would be suffering. And because I remembered this, I changed my mind. I never went through with it, and I came back. And so the abbot then explains to him what he had seen. That your thought of wrongdoing, you are followed by these spirits of misfortune. But then when you change your mind, and you are followed by these kind spirits. And so Mr. Yuan is very moved and motivated. And when he returns home, he's redoubles his efforts in doing good. And of course, in those days, these kinds of texts were readily available and were well read. Texts like the Exalted Treatise, and to really dedicate himself to good deeds, kind acts. And what happens is that he later passes his exams and becomes a very eminent government official. Now, the point of the story is that it just takes one thought, doesn't it? That he hadn't actually gone through with, murdering this person. But already there was this immediate response from the universe, from these spirits that they knew. And so it's the same with us, that if we give rise to a thought of kindness, then we will be supported. And we shouldn't feel that we're alone, but actually that the spirits know, and in time, so will others know about our heart and mind of kindness. So this is quite motivating. Now, some people might say, well, I've only just learned about this Exalted Treatise, and I've realized, of course, that there are so many things that I did in the past that I didn't even know were actually wrong. What do I do now? And the Exalted Treatise gives us the answer. So one who repents and reforms from past misdeeds, refrains from further wrongdoings, and then does various good deeds will in time attain happiness. And this is how we transform the misfortune into good fortune. So it's never too late. It just takes one thought. And this repenting, Venerable Master provides a very simple explanation. Repenting is not only saying sorry, but more importantly, it is about not repeating that misdeed. So yes, it's important to say sorry and apologize to people, but you can't always be saying sorry if you keep repeating your mistakes, your misdeeds. They're not mistakes if you're intentionally doing it. So you have to repent and you have to reform, you have to change, and no longer commit these misdeeds. Now, it's not just that particular misdeed, but refrain from all wrongdoings, and as set out in the texts like the Exalted Treatise. And not only should we be refraining from all wrongdoing, but we should also make effort to do good deeds. So the second section of the text, to look at the, what we're doing and to change, but not just to stop it, but to think about it in terms of how we can change this into merit rather than demerit. And you would have noticed that in our explanations, we would have looked at the misdeed, but thought about, okay, well, how can I change it? How can this be made a positive thing, and not simply just ceasing from wrongdoing? And that's, if we focus on the good, then we will receive good fortune. So this is very interesting because the Exalted Treatise helps us provide this perspective in life, to understanding what is good and what is the so-called wrongdoing. And it concludes with the idea that, a person who's fortunate, so a person who will in time receive good fortune, or is currently quite fortunate, that's not because of some accident. It's because in the past or currently they are virtuous in what they say, see, and do. Okay, so what does it mean here to be virtuous in what you say? Well, if we think back to the earlier sections, it's the idea that, we have to be careful in our words, and our words should help benefit the listener, to encourage them to do the right thing, encourage them to change their ways, and to educate them or instruct them in some way. So this, being virtuous in what you say doesn't always simply mean praising them. Okay? And sometimes praise can be negative. It can make them feel that what they're doing is right all the time. So being virtuous in what we say is based on our intention to help others. And sometimes that can be providing constructive criticism as well, particularly if they have confidence in you. So this is our words. Then this idea of what we see. Now, in the past, when the Exalted Treatise was written in the 12th century, this, it could be what we read in terms of the texts. They also had theatre, etc. But in today's world, it's even more obvious because, sometimes our screen time, the time we spend on screens, mobiles, laptops, television, etc., tablets, is more than the time we have face-to-face talking with others. And so what we see is very important. Well, what is it that we give our attention to? Okay, so it's not like, we're standing in front of something, we see so many things every day, we walk past so many people, but who do we give our attention to? What is it that we are scrolling on our mobiles? What is it that we are watching on our laptops that we tune into? There's millions of videos, but what is it that we tune into? And the point is to, tune into things that would help ourselves in terms of educating ourselves to do our jobs, our study, our work better, to be able to, approach our various roles. It's not just our work, not just our study, but our roles and relationships in the family. How to approach that in the right way and be able to understand it in a way that is beneficial to the people around us. So are we, when we view things on our mobile or our computers or TVs, etc., is that our criteria? And if that is, this idea of virtue is, thinking about helping others, then that is virtuous in what we see. Okay, so that's important to keep in your mind. And then what we do is not simply our actions towards others, how we behave towards others, but actually it's everything in the guidelines for being a good person, the deeds of way, including how we arrange our room, keeping things neat and tidy. So this doing is how we interact with the environment around us. It's not just other people, it's the objects, the material objects. And, I've been really blessed to, my family members, but also teachers I've encountered have really sort of the kind of people who really take care of the things around them, not just their clothing, but, their books, their desks, etc. So much so that, something that might last for most people 5 years, it could last 10 years because of the care that you take when you, use these objects of daily life. So this is the doing. And this doing is not just in our work or study, but how we interact with the environment. So by practicing these 3 ways of virtue every day, now 3 here is not just saying, the say, seeing, and doing, but also more importantly, and it's not about just 3 acts of kindness every day. The 3 in Chinese is representative of many. Okay, so what we say, see, and do obviously is underlined by our thoughts. And can you imagine how many thoughts we have throughout the day? So there's potential for many acts of virtue every day through our thoughts. So it's not just 3, but here it highlights 3 ways. So say, seeing, and doing each day. So this is the idea that we keep it up on a daily basis, then heaven will bless us. So if we look at the Chinese, that word is translated here as will, which is there's no doubt. There's no doubt that you will receive blessings, you will receive good fortune. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. Here, it uses the term 3 years. Okay, so it's trying to tell us that, we can't, expect that we're, very good today in what we say, see, and do, and then expect that we win the lotto tomorrow. It's not going to happen. We have to ensure that we keep it up, sustainable. We create good habits. And then over time, we will see the effects. And similarly, if we don't do that, a misfortunate person, someone who encounters misfortune, is because of what they say, see, and do is all about themselves, their own enjoyment, their own self-interest, and potentially harming others. And because they do this day in, day out, and they don't recognize it, they don't detect it, evaluate, or change, then it is undoubtedly that, without a doubt, that they will be punished. But these demerits will accumulate, and they will encounter misfortune. Again, it won't happen immediately, but it will happen. Okay, so it's very clear cut, isn't it? The Exalted Treatise helps us make decisions in our daily life with a clear mind. We're well informed now. What is good, what is not, and how we can motivate ourselves. And ultimately, the last line is a rhetorical question. Why not make efforts in one's practice? What have you got to lose? If we just, one thought of kindness, everyone can do that. And we make the decision. It's in our hands. So just to quickly recap, thinking about the structure and also this conclusion that is quite dense but carries a lot of important messages. The first 3 lines here relate to the earlier sections, which are very long, but essentially were about the basic principles of the law of retribution, or otherwise known as cause and effect, that if we do good, we think, say, when we act, what we see is good, then we will receive reward. The contrary, being unkind in thoughts, words, actions, and what we view, see, bring our attention to, leads to misfortune. So those are the basic principles. And then the Exalted Treatise instructs us on what it means by kindness or goodness. And then this very long section on misdeeds to help us recognize and cease the misdeeds. And the last section that we cover today is about understanding the consequences, that it's not just consequences for ourselves, this suffering, there's no accidents in life that, you've encountered setbacks. It's time to reflect on yourself. But also things that you don't feel, that life is actually slipping away, it's being reduced. And it's not just for yourself, but for your family, for your future generations. Okay? And then, that we should think about these consequences and realize that it's like, having these wrong thoughts cross our mind is like drinking or eating poison. And if you realize it, you stop, let it go, don't think about it anymore. So it just takes one thought. Kindness or unkindness is just one thought. And we can actually transform anything that any misfortune. We can change our destiny by what it is that we do right here, right now, and if we can sustain it. So it tells us to evaluate what we see, say, and do according to these guidelines, and to really keep it up. We've got nothing to lose. Let's just keep practicing through every day, every moment, and we have to sustain it to see the results. And we will see the results. It is without a doubt. So why not make efforts in one's practice? The choice is ours. We can either walk the path on the left or the right, towards good fortune or misfortune. And whatever we do, we will ultimately meet with good fortune or misfortune. And we cannot blame anyone else because we have walked the path ourselves. The decision is yours. So I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you very much for your kind attention in this lecture series. Stop the recording now, but I do have an announcement.